the Galactic Fear Commission banned human because it traumatized entire worlds. Part 1. Commissioner's four eyes blinked in sequence as he stared at the emergency report on his desk. In his 300 years working for the Galactic Fear Commission, he had never seen anything like this. 3 worlds, 40 million beings, all requiring immediate psychiatric intervention. He adjusted his breathing apparatus and read the report again, hoping he had misunderstood. He had not. On Prime, 200,000 drones of the Hive Mind Collective had fractured from the main consciousness. They huddled in corners, refusing to sleep, whispering about experiments and subjects who begged for death. The hive mind, which had functioned perfectly for 10,000 years, was breaking apart. The aquatic people had stopped going near reflective surfaces. Thousands had scratched their own eyes, trying to avoid seeing their smiling faces in the water. The planetary government declared a state of emergency when citizens began destroying mirrors, windows, and anything that might show a reflection. On station, the dream-sharing species had contaminated their entire collective unconscious. A cascading nightmare plague spread from mind to mind. They dreamed of caves and videos and things that should not exist. Medical teams had to sedate nearly half the population. Press the communication button on his desk. Send in agent and senior investigator. The door opened moments later. Walked in first, her human features composed and professional. Behind her came, his chitinous body clicking softly as he moved. The investigator had worked with the Commission for 70 years and had seen every kind of psychological crisis the galaxy could produce. Commissioner said, nodding respectfully. "Sit down, both of you," gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "We have a situation, and I need you to investigate it immediately." Santini twitched. "The mass breakdowns on the 3 worlds." "Yes, we have traced the source. All affected individuals accessed human entertainment databases within 48 hours of their psychological collapse." "Sat up human databases. What kind of entertainment?" "That is what you need to find out. The affected beings all access something called, from Earth's early internet era. Do you know what this is?" His face showed surprise, then understanding, then concern. "Oh no. Yes, I know what that is. Commissioner are scary stories that humans share online. They're horror fiction meant to frighten people." "Frighten?" Translator made his voice sound genuinely confused. "Your species creates stories designed to cause fear. For what purpose?" "Entertainment," said quietly. "We find it fun." Watched antennae droop in confusion. The commissioner understood the reaction. Most galactic species found the concept of recreational fear incomprehensible. "Agent, I need you to understand the severity of this situation. On Prime, drones read something called the Russian sleep experiment. The story describes subjects forced to stay awake until they became monsters. The hive mind uses hibernation cycles to process information. After reading this story, 200,000 drones became terrified of their own rest periods. They believe if they sleep, they will become the creatures from the story." His face paled. "That story isn't real, it's fiction made up." They understand this intellectually. Emotionally, they cannot process it. The fear has embedded itself in their collective consciousness. They know it is not real, but they cannot stop imagining it happening to them. Pulled up on the situation is worse. One individual encountered a story called The Smiling Man, a tale about a figure that appears in reflections, grinning impossibly wide. They are an aquatic species. They are surrounded by reflective surfaces constantly. Now they see the smiling man in every reflection, even though they know he does not exist. "And station?" asked. His voice grew heavy. "The share dreams as their primary form of communication. One individual read something called 1999 before entering the dream share. The story involves a children's television show that traumatizes viewers. The imagery spread through the collective unconscious like a virus. Now thousands of them experience the same nightmare every time they sleep. Stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Commissioner, I need to explain something about humans. We evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, other humans. Our brains developed the ability to imagine terrible scenarios and prepare for them. Horror stories are how we practice dealing with fear in a safe environment. Safe, translator gave his voice an edge of disbelief. These stories are causing civilizations to collapse. For other species, yes. But for humans, these are just stories. We can separate imagination from reality. We know the monsters aren't real, and that knowledge keeps us safe from the fear. Stood and joined at the window. Agent, most galactic species evolved on worlds that were relatively safe. Our predators were simple. Our dangers were concrete. We never needed to develop the psychological barriers that humans possess. When we imagine something terrible, our minds treat it as real. We cannot simply dismiss it. I understand, Commissioner. Do you? Because the Council is meeting in 2 days to discuss quarantining Earth's cultural exports. Some representatives want to classify humanity as a psychologically hazardous species. They want to restrict human contact with other civilizations. Turned to face him, her eyes wide. They can't do that. We've been part of the galactic community for 150 years. They can and they will unless we find a solution. That is why I need you and to investigate this immediately. Find out why human stories have this effect. Find out if there is a way to prevent it. Find out if we can coexist safely with humanity's horror culture. Stood as well, where do we start? The infected databases. We have quarantined them, but you will need to examine the content directly. Agent, you will read the stories and explain them to us. You will analyze their psychological impact on non-human species. Nodded slowly. I'll need to review the material carefully. Some are worse than others. The really effective ones use psychological tricks that prey on deep fears. That is precisely what concerns us, said. We need to understand how humans can create such effective fear triggers and not be affected by them. Over the next 3 days and worked in a secure research facility. Read through the stories that had caused the breakdowns, explaining each one to her partner. Documented everything, trying to understand what made them so devastating to alien minds. This one is called Ben Drowned, said, pulling up a file. It's about a haunted video game. The story uses familiar elements, something people trust, like a children's game, and corrupts them. It makes the familiar become threatening. His antennae quivered. How can you read this without distress? Because I know it's not real. My brain has a filter. I can enjoy the fear response without believing the threat is genuine. And other humans have this same filter. Most of us, yes. Children develop it as they grow. We tell scary stories around campfires, watch horror movies, read creepy tales online. It's normal for us. Was silent for a long moment. Agent, I must be honest with you. I find your species deeply disturbing. You deliberately expose yourselves and your young to psychological distress for entertainment. This is not normal behavior. Smiled sadly. I know we're weird, but it's part of who we are. As they worked, more reports came in. A Confederacy world had accessed content about something called Local 58, and the entire cities were evacuating because citizens refused to enter buildings alone. The fear was spreading. On the 5th day, called them back to his office. His 4 eyes looked tired, and his breathing apparatus rasped with stress. The Council has made its decision. They are moving forward with a galaxy-wide ban on all human horror content. Furthermore, they want to establish cultural quarantine protocols for Earth. All human entertainment must be screened before being released to the galactic public. His jaw tightened. Commissioner, that's not fair. We didn't know this would happen. Fairness is not the concern. Safety is. However, I have negotiated one concession. You will be allowed to present a defense before the full council in 2 weeks. You must explain why humanity's horror culture exists and whether it poses a permanent threat to galactic mental health. How am I supposed to do that? You must return to Earth. Interview your horror writers, your psychologists, your scientists. Make the council understand why humans are different. An agent, you must do it well. The future of humanity's place in the galactic community depends on it. Looked at, who had been silent throughout the meeting, the investigator finally spoke. I will accompany you to Earth. I need to understand this myself. Your species fascinates and terrifies me in equal measure. As they left the office, couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Somewhere in humanity's long history of telling scary stories around fires, they had developed something unique, something the galaxy had never encountered before. And now she had to explain it to species who had never needed to imagine monsters in the dark. The transport to Earth would take 3 days. Spent them preparing her investigation, making lists of people to interview, places to visit. She thought about the stories that had caused so much damage, stories that humans had created for fun, never imagining they could break alien minds. She remembered being a child, reading on her late at night, heart pounding with delicious fear. She remembered the thrill of being scared and the relief of knowing it wasn't real. That sensation, so normal to humans, was apparently unique in the galaxy. As Earth appeared in the viewport, green and blue and wrapped in white clouds, wondered what they would find. Could she really explain humanity's relationship with fear? Could she make the council understand that humans weren't dangerous, just different? Stood beside her, looking at the planet where horror stories were born. Your world looks peaceful, he said softly. It does, agreed, but it hasn't always been. Earth has tried to kill humans in every way possible for millions of years. Maybe that's why we learned to laugh at monsters, because if we didn't laugh, we'd never stop screaming. The transport began its descent and steeled herself for what was coming. She had 2 weeks to save humanity's reputation, 2 weeks to explain the unexplainable, 2 weeks to show the galaxy that scary stories were not weapons, but gifts from a species that had learned to dance with fear instead of running from it. Part 2. The landing platform in Geneva was busy with galactic traffic, and made their way through customs quickly, their commission credentials opening doors that would normally require hours of processing. By evening, they were in a hotel conference room, preparing for their first interview. Dr. Sarah arrived carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. The neuroscientist was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had published extensively on fear response and emotional regulation in humans. Agent, investigator, thank you for meeting with me. Doctor sat down and immediately pulled up brain scans on the wall display. I've been following the reports about the alien psychological breakdowns. I think I can help you understand what's happening. Santeni focused on the images. These are human brain scans. Yes, these 3 scans show the same person's brain activity. First, during a normal conversation. Second, while reading a story. Third, immediately after finishing the story. Studied the images. The second scan showed intense activity in several regions. The third scan showed those regions calming down, returning to normal levels. What are we looking at, doctor? She asked. The second scan shows activation in the amygdala, which processes fear. But notice these areas here. Doctor pointed to other bright regions. The prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex are also highly active. These areas are responsible for distinguishing between real and imagined threats. In humans, they activate simultaneously with the fear response. A safety mechanism, said slowly. Exactly. When humans experience fictional fear, our brains are doing 2 things at once. Part of us feels the fear response, increased heart rate, adrenaline release, heightened awareness. But another part is constantly monitoring and reminding us that the threat isn't real. We have a built-in reality check. Leaned forward, and other species don't have this. Based on the medical reports from the affected aliens, no. Their fear centers activate, but the monitoring systems don't engage the same way. When imagines the Russian sleep experiment scenario, their brain treats it as a real potential threat. They can't dismiss it. Doctor pulled up more data. Humans evolved this capability because we needed it. Our ancestors faced constant danger, but they also needed to plan for future threats, imagine worst-case scenarios, and prepare responses. If every imagined danger triggered full panic, they couldn't function. So we developed the ability to experience fear without being overwhelmed by it. Why do humans seek this out? Asked. If you can control the fear, why activate it deliberately? Doctor smiled. That's the fascinating part. Controlled fear exposure has psychological benefits. It reduces anxiety, builds emotional resilience, and creates social bonds. When humans share scary stories, they're practicing stress management together. They're teaching their brains that fear can be overcome. Over the next 2 days, and interviewed horror authors, psychologists, and cultural historians. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. A horror novelist with 30 published books met them in Seattle. Rain pattered against the windows as he explained his craft. Horror is about control, said, stirring his tea. In real life, terrible things happen randomly. People get sick, accidents occur, violence erupts without warning. But in horror stories, there's structure. A beginning, middle, and end. The monster might win, but at least there's a narrative. It makes chaos manageable. So humans use these stories to process real fears? Asked. Absolutely. After 9/11, zombie movies became hugely popular. During the pandemic, plague-themed horror surged. We take our real anxieties and transform them into stories we can control. We face them on our terms. Translator crackled. But the stories that damaged alien minds are not about real threats. They are about fictional monsters and impossible scenarios. Nodded. True, but they tap into deeper fears. Fear of losing control, fear of the familiar becoming dangerous, fear of something wrong lurking beneath normal surfaces. These are universal anxieties. The specific monster doesn't matter. It's what it represents. Their third day on Earth brought them to a horror convention in Los Angeles. Had worried that exposing to thousands of enthusiastic horror fans might be too much, but the investigator insisted on seeing human horror culture firsthand. The convention center buzzed with energy. People dressed as monsters, demons, and killers filled the halls. Vendors sold books, movies, and merchandise featuring gruesome imagery. Panel discussions analyzed famous horror works. Everywhere, humans laughed and smiled while surrounded by depictions of death and terror. Stopped in front of a booth selling compilations. These are the stories that broke the hive mind. Your people are selling them as entertainment. They are entertainment for us, said gently. They attended a panel called The Psychology of. 5 authors sat on stage, discussing their most popular stories. One woman who wrote under the name Lilith Shadow explained her process. I want readers to feel unsafe in familiar places, she said. I take something normal like a children's TV show or a video game and I corrupt it. I make the comfortable feel dangerous. That's what makes effective. An audience member asked, "Don't you worry about giving people nightmares?" Lilith Shadow laughed. That's kind of the point. A good horror story should linger, but it's all in good fun. If it really bothered someone, they wouldn't keep reading. After the panel, and managed to speak with Lilith Shadow privately. The author, whose real name was Tors, was intrigued by their investigation. I never thought about how aliens might react to horror, said. For us, it's like a roller coaster. You get scared, your heart races, but you know you're safe. The thrill is in the temporary fear. But what if you could not distinguish temporary from permanent? Asked. His expression grew thoughtful. Then it would be torture, not entertainment. I get that. Horror only works as fun if you can turn it off. That evening, they visited his grandmother, Tors, better known by her pen name, Mrs. Blackwood. The elderly woman had been writing horror for 60 years and was considered one of the genre's pioneers. Mrs. Blackwood lived in a cottage outside the city, surrounded by shelves of books. She served them tea and cookies before settling into her armchair. "So the galaxy is upset about our scary stories," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Can't say I'm surprised. Humans have always been a bit odd about fear." "Mrs. Blackwood, can you help us understand why humans create horror?" asked. The old woman sipped her tea. "It's simple, really. We come from a world that tried to kill us for hundreds of thousands of years. Predators, diseases, famines, wars, natural disasters. Death was always close. Our ancestors couldn't escape it, so they learned to face it. They told stories about monsters and ghosts and things in the dark, not to increase fear but to decrease it. By numbing the terror, by giving it shape, they made it smaller." "But surely the fear response still causes distress," said. "Of course it does. That's the point. We practice being afraid in safe conditions so we're ready when real danger comes. It's like a fire drill. You practice evacuating so you know what to do when there's an actual fire." Mrs. Blackwood stood and walked to her window, looking out at the darkening sky. "Your alien friends, they come from safe worlds, don't they? Worlds where evolution was gentle. They never needed to imagine the worst because the worst rarely happened." "That's correct," confirmed. "Then they're not prepared for a universe that isn't safe. And it isn't, you know. Space is dangerous. There are things out there that can hurt you, things you can't predict or control. Humans know this in our bones because Earth taught us. We're not brave, dear. We're not fearless. We're just from a world that didn't give us the luxury of avoiding fear. So we learned to laugh at monsters because if we didn't, we'd never stop screaming." Was silent for a long moment. His antennae drooped and his translator was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Mrs. Blackwood, I find your species deeply disturbing. You deliberately expose yourselves and your young to psychological distress. You create elaborate scenarios designed to trigger fear. You compete to create the most frightening stories. This is not normal behavior." "No," the old woman agreed. "It's survival behavior disguised as entertainment." That night back at their hotel, an emergency message arrived. Another world had accessed human horror content. The planet had discovered a horror game called Fears to Fathom and a video series called The population was now experiencing mass paranoia. Citizens refused to enter their homes, convinced something was waiting inside. The government was collapsing as people abandoned cities. Read the report, her hands shaking. "It's spreading faster. More species are finding our content and being damaged by it." Paced the room, his chitinous legs clicking on the floor. "I am beginning to understand the problem. Your horror works because it exploits universal fears, fear of the familiar becoming strange, fear of losing control, fear of unseen threats. These fears exist in all species, but only humans have developed immunity to their own psychological weapons." "We're not trying to weaponize fear," protested. "I know, that makes it worse. You create these things casually for fun. You have no idea how dangerous they are because to you, they are harmless." The next morning brought worse news. The Galactic Council had moved up the hearing, would present humanity's case in 3 days, not 2 weeks. The psychological damage was spreading too quickly. Several council members were calling for immediate quarantine protocols, and spent their remaining time on Earth gathering testimonies and evidence. They filmed interviews with psychologists, recorded brain scans, and documented horror conventions. They collected statements from human children who loved scary stories and adults who had grown up on horror movies. On their last evening, they returned to visit Mrs. Blackwood one final time. The old author had written something for them to present to the council. "Tell them this," she said, handing a handwritten letter. Humanity's horror stories are not an attack, they're a gift. We're sharing the tools that helped us survive, the ability to face fear, to imagine the worst and prepare for it, to practice courage in safe conditions. Other species may not need these tools yet, but someday they might. And when that day comes, they'll be grateful humans learned to dance with monsters in the dark. As their transport lifted off from Earth, looked down at the planet. Somewhere down there, millions of humans were watching horror movies, reading scary stories, playing frightening games. They were laughing and screaming and having fun with fear. It was so normal to them that they never questioned it. But the galaxy was questioning it, and in 3 days would have to convince 47 species that humanity's strange relationship with fear was not a threat to galactic safety. Sat beside her reviewing their evidence. Agent, I must confess something. Before this investigation, I thought humans were perhaps a lesser species. You're short, your fragile bodies, your strange emotions. But now I understand. You are not lesser. You are different. You evolved in a crucible that most species never experience, and that created something unique. Is unique enough to save us from quarantine. I do not know, but I will argue in your favor. The galaxy needs to understand what Earth has taught humanity, because I fear Mrs. Blackwood is correct. Someday, we may all need to know how to face monsters. Part 3. The Council Chamber was built to accommodate all 47 member species of the Galactic Confederation. The circular room rose in tiers, each level holding representatives from different worlds. At the bottom stood a platform where would make her presentation. She had 3 hours to change the galaxy's mind about humanity. Commissioner opened the session. Representatives of the Confederation, we are here to address the crisis caused by human horror entertainment. 3 worlds have suffered mass psychological trauma. Billions of credits have been spent on psychiatric care. Economic damage is mounting. The question before us is simple. Should human cultural content be restricted to protect galactic mental health? The delegate rose, their collective voice speaking as one. The answer is obvious. Human stories damaged our hive mind in ways we never thought possible. 200,000 drones still cannot rejoin the collective. They imagine horrors constantly. This is unacceptable. The representative's tank bubbled as they spoke. Our people are mutilating themselves to avoid their own reflections. Children refuse to swim. Adults have gone mad from fear of water. How can we allow humans to continue spreading this poison? Stood on the platform, feeling the weight of their accusations. Stood beside her, ready to present their evidence. Representatives, may I speak? His voice echoed through the chamber. Nodded. Agent, you may present your defense. Activated the holographic display. Brain scans appeared, floating above the platform. What we're dealing with is not a human attack. It's a fundamental difference in how our species process fear. These scans show that when humans experience fictional horror, our brains activate both fear centers and reality testing mechanisms simultaneously. We evolved this dual processing capability because we had to. She changed the display to show Earth's geological and biological history. Predators, plagues, ice ages, volcanic eruptions. Earth is what we call a death world. For millions of years, it tried to kill us in every way possible. Our ancestors couldn't escape danger, so they learned to face it. Horror stories became a training tool. We practice fear in controlled conditions, so we're prepared for real threats. The delegate, whose people still suffered from cascading nightmares, spoke. This does not change the damage caused. Your training tools are weapons to us. You're right, admitted. And we never knew. Humans have been telling scary stories for tens of thousands of years. It's so normal to us that we never considered it might harm others. But consider this. What happens when the galaxy faces a threat that cannot be reasoned with? What happens when you encounter something truly incomprehensible? What do you mean? Asked the representative. Stepped forward. I will explain. During our investigation on Earth, I experienced something disturbing. I watched humans laugh while viewing horror content. I saw children enjoy scary stories. I witnessed thousands of people celebrating fear at what they call a horror convention. It made no sense to me. Fear is a survival mechanism, a warning system. Why would any species seek it out? He paused, letting his words sink in. But then I understood. Humans are not seeking fear itself. They are practicing the mental processes needed to overcome fear. They are training themselves to face the incomprehensible without breaking. The chamber filled with murmurs. Representatives spoke among themselves in their various languages. "This is speculation," the delegate said. "You are asking us to accept psychological damage now based on a hypothetical future threat." Is it hypothetical? Pulled up new data on the display. 6 months ago, a deep space probe detected anomalous signals near the galactic rim. The Periphery Research Station sent a team to investigate. 3 scientists examined the signals directly. All 3 are now in psychiatric care, unable to explain what they experienced. They speak only of things that should not exist, of mathematics that makes no sense, of images that hurt to perceive. The chamber went silent. "The report was classified," continued. "But as a commission investigator I have access. Something is out there. Something that does not communicate in ways we understand. Something that causes madness through mere contact. And it is moving closer." Felt a chill run through her. Investigator, why wasn't I informed of this? Because until now, I did not connect it to our investigation. But during my time on Earth, I realized something. The things those scientists describe, impossible geometries, familiar spaces becoming wrong, the sensation of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. These are the same themes in human horror stories. He turned to face the full council. Humans have been imagining these exact scenarios for centuries, not because they encountered them, but because their minds were prepared to conceive of them. They have been training for threats we did not know existed. The delegate, whose world was currently suffering mass paranoia, stood. "This is an interesting theory, investigator, but it does not solve our immediate problem. Our citizens are traumatized. They cannot function." "Because they were exposed without preparation," said. "Humans spend their entire lives building up psychological resistance. We start with gentle stories as children and gradually work up to more intense horror. We practice in communities, supporting each other. We learn that fear can be faced and overcome. You cannot just show someone the Russian sleep experiment and expect them to handle it. That would be like asking someone who has never exercised to run a marathon." She changed the display again, showing videos from her Earth investigation. Human children listening to ghost stories around a campfire, teenagers watching horror movies together, adults discussing online. This is how we learn. Gradually, safely, with support. "You are suggesting we adopt human horror culture across the galaxy?" The delegate sounded incredulous. "Not adopt it, adapt it, learn from it. We can develop inoculation programs. Start with very gentle exposure to conceptual fear. Build up tolerance slowly. Teach people the mental techniques humans use to separate imagination from reality." "This will take generations," the delegate said. "Maybe, but consider the alternative. Right now, your people are damaged because they encountered our horror unprepared. But what happens when you encounter something genuinely incomprehensible? What happens when the thing at the galactic rim arrives, and your people have no mental framework for processing it?" Mrs. Blackwood's recorded testimony played on the display. The elderly author looked directly at the council. "You want to ban human horror because it hurts you. I understand, but you're treating the symptom, not the disease. The real problem is that most galactic species have never needed to imagine worst-case scenarios. Your worlds were safe. Your evolution was gentle. You never developed the psychological muscles that humans have. But space is not safe. The universe is not gentle. And sooner or later, you will face something that requires those muscles." The chamber erupted in debate. Representatives argued in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate quarantine of Earth. Others wanted to know more about the Periphery Station incident. A few seemed intrigued by his proposal. Then the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed throughout the chamber. Emergency protocols activated. A holographic display appeared, showing a transmission from Periphery Station. The image showed a scientist, all four eyes wide with terror. "This is Periphery Station. We have lost contact with Survey Team 7. Their last transmission was, I cannot describe it. The signal contained information that should not exist. 3 more staff members have been hospitalized after viewing it. Something is out there, something vast, something that thinks in ways we cannot comprehend. We are evacuating the station." The transmission cut out. The council chamber descended into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other. Some demanded military deployment. Others called for retreat. Fear spread through the chamber like a living thing. Stood at the center of it all, watching the galaxy's leaders panic at the mere hint of an incomprehensible threat. Then she looked at whose antennae were trembling. The investigator who had spent the last 2 weeks studying human horror culture was frightened, but he was not breaking. He was processing the fear, analyzing it, preparing to face it. He had learned something from his time on Earth. Commissioner called for order. It took several minutes, but eventually the chamber quieted. Thus 4 eyes were heavy with understanding. "Representatives," he said slowly, "I believe we have just witnessed Agent's point proven in real time. We heard a report about something we cannot understand and we panicked. But look at the humans in this chamber. Agent is frightened, yes, but she is not breaking. She is thinking, planning, preparing. This is what their horror culture has taught them." The delegate spoke quietly. "What do you propose, Commissioner?" "I propose we do not ban human horror content. Instead, I propose we learn from it. Agent, you suggested inoculation programs. I want you to develop them immediately. Start with the gentlest human horror stories. Create training programs that teach other species how to process conceptual fear. Build the psychological muscles that humans have." "And in the meantime," asked the delegate. "In the meantime, we prepare for first contact with whatever is at the galactic rim. And I suggest we include humans in that preparation team. They are the only species mentally equipped to face the incomprehensible." The vote was close, but it passed. Human horror content would not be banned. Instead, humanity would lead the galaxy's first psychological resilience training program. Earth would export not just their scary stories, but the mental tools to handle them. Spent the next 6 months developing the program. She worked with alien psychologists to adapt human horror for different species. They started with the gentlest possible content, mild suspense, small surprises, manageable fears. They built support groups and trained counselors. They taught alien children that imagination could be controlled. It was slow work. Some species took to it better than others. They remained skeptical, though a few brave drones volunteered for the early programs. They struggled with visual horror but responded well to audio stories. They learned to shield their dream sharing so nightmares couldn't spread. Meanwhile, the thing at the galactic rim drew closer. Survey ships sent back increasingly disturbing reports, spatial anomalies, communications that caused madness, images that hurt to perceive. The galaxy was facing something it had never encountered before, a threat that could not be understood through conventional means. The first contact team was assembled, 50 members from 20 species, and at its core, 12 humans with extensive experience in horror culture. Writers, gamers, psychologists, and artists who had spent their lives engaging with incomprehensible fear. Was appointed team leader, volunteered as her second. "Are you sure about this?" she asked him the night before they shipped out. "You've seen what human horror content does to alien minds." "Santeni,"